Hello and welcome to There's No Business Like, a podcast where friends and industry colleagues explore topics and interview leaders in our industry of professional theatrical touring.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to There's No Business Like. I am your host for this week, Katie Traska-Miller with Michigan Maven Creative Associates in Midland, Michigan, and I am so happy to welcome a great friend of mine to the podcast today, Ryan VanDenBoom.
Hello, Katie. I'm so happy to be here. I'm recording from the Neil Simon Theater, where I'm between shows at MJ the Musical on Broadway.
Excellent. All right. Well, Ryan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I grew up in Michigan and was a performing arts kid from the very outset. I was kind of running around my living room dancing to Michael Jackson songs, actually. And my parents put me into some dance lessons at an early age, and I really took to it. And with the support of the community and lots of mentors, I ended up studying theater at New York University and finished my bachelor's degree there. And then I was fortunate enough to sort of launch right into my Broadway career with making my Broadway debut in the musical Annie at the Palace Theater. And that also introduced me to one of my longtime mentors and friends, Andy Blankenbuehler, who you may know from Hamilton fame, choreographer and director. And he's sort of ushered me into a couple of other artistic endeavors. I was able to be a part of the original Broadway cast of a show called Bandstand that I performed in Hamilton in Chicago. And I also was in the original Broadway cast of Something Rotten. And so that kind of brought me to my current home, which is, as I mentioned, here at the Neil Simon, where I've been performing in MJ the Musical for about 4.5 years. Which has been quite an amazing experience.
You are the definition of a working Broadway actor, right? So let's talk a little bit about just your experience on Broadway. First of all, can you tell us, because I love this story about you, how you moved to New York and then almost immediately got Annie? It's a little bit of a Cinderella story, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's worth mentioning that my experience being in school at NYU was a real bridge for me, having grown up in a pretty small town in Michigan and then choosing to make the leap to go to New York. I was really grateful to be a part of a college experience and start my networking right away when I moved to the city. And so by the time I was getting ready to finish my studies at NYU, I had started auditioning because you're already here. You have sort of your living arrangements probably set up. You know the lay of the land. You're kind of moving around the city with some grace. And I truly went to an open call of the musical Annie. In fact, the full story, I was working at the Apple Store on Fifth Avenue, and one of my colleagues, also a musical theater performer, had seen this posting of this audition for Annie, and he was like, you should go in for this. And of course, I knew of the show Annie, and I was like, I don't know why you're thinking of me for Annie, but whatever. So I did. I showed up to the open call, and at this point, the choreographer of the show was this guy, Andy Blankenbuehler, who at that point I'd done a number of musicals, but his big show at that time was In the Heights. So I had seen In the Heights, and I was somewhat familiar with his work. And it was immediate, sort of the connection that I had with his choreography and his style. And after about, I think, like 6 callbacks, I ended up getting the job. And the way I see it kind of looking back is, being a young guy who was new on the scene, they had to kind of put me through my paces to make sure that I was actually at the level they needed me to be at to be a part of a Broadway show. And so after, like I said, several callbacks, one of them being in front of Charles Strauss, the composer of Annie, I remember leaving the room being like, I think that was Charles Strauss. And then, of course, I had to look it up and be like, that was Charles Strauss. I was fortunate enough to get cast and truly made lifelong friends in that experience, and worked with obviously a lot of young people who went on to do kind of amazing things. But a lot of those folks that I worked with on that first Broadway show that I did remain lifelong friends. So it's been an awesome introduction into the business, and one that I really hold near and dear.
Oh, that's amazing. So then take us from there into the next things you do, because I feel like probably transitioning from one show to the next is an interesting experience, particularly the first time you do it, and you're still trying to learn and figure out your way to navigate that. So at this point, did you have an agent? Did you go on more auditions? How did you move from Annie into the next thing after that?
I'm so glad you asked me that, because one of the things that I realized when I started working on Annie was how much I had yet to learn. I think a lot of young people, they book their first Broadway experience or maybe any kind of big gig, and they're like, okay, I've made it, like I've done it, the work is done. And I had sort of the opposite experience where I really felt like I had gotten lucky. I thought that I had like fooled the the casting and creatives.
Yeah.
I just remember being at that first music rehearsal and being surrounded by people who like were true triple threats and like voices that were part of so many other original Broadway cast recordings that I had heard. And I took this opportunity knowing that I was going to be a part of this Broadway show for at least a time, to get back into voice lessons and get back into training, and really stack myself up with my castmates, not in a competitive way necessarily, but in an inspired way. And so I got myself right back into voice lessons, and the transition out of Annie wasn't super graceful, to be honest. I went a good amount of time without working on Broadway, but it did open me up to other opportunities. I actually got linked up with a silent comedy / like clown troupe that I worked with, and I actually toured Germany with them for a portion of the time after I finished with Annie. And then also during that time, I booked a Broadway show. It was called Bullets Over Broadway. It was a Susan Stroman project. And then while I was away in Germany, that show closed. So basically, I was working with this clown troupe, traveling in Germany. I was set to return to New York and start rehearsals for this other Broadway show that was already running. While I was away in Germany, that show closed. And so that was a Broadway show that kind of like came and went, that I never got to perform in. But it was a good lesson in sort of how to like kind of keep it moving. And I'll never forget, actually, Susan Stroman personally sent me an email just like thanking me for coming in and apologizing for the show closing. It was like super class act. But I bring that up because even in something that was maybe not as graceful, I was able to expand my community. I met a whole other group of people with this sort of clown troupe, and I learned a whole other set of skills that I still am like leaning on to this day. And I had an experience, right, traveling in a different country and seeing sort of how the arts manifest there. And so, I think that like the lesson there is just sort of like trusting the process, and even when things are not for you, that like the next thing will come. And then in fact, when I got back from this experience in Germany, the next audition that I went on was for Something Rotten. So and just to keep dovetailing the stories, I had like an okay audition for Something Rotten, but I think what really got me that job was it was the same stage manager from Annie. And
okay.
they, Casey Nicola is pretty historically known for, yes, of course, holding auditions, but really casting people through just who he knows and word of mouth. And so, he did his homework, and oh, Ryan worked on Annie. Oh, he worked with Charlie Underhill. I know Charlie. Let me call Charlie. Hey, I got this Ryan VanDenBoom kid. He's pretty good in the audition, but like, is he nice? Like, do we like him? Do we like to work with him? And I really think that was a huge proponent into me getting sort of that next Broadway experience, which was just like the way that I show up to work, and the way that I carry myself in the space. So, yeah.
Oh, I mean, be nice to your stage managers, kids, like that.
So true. But they wield a lot of power, they wield a lot of power. And I mean, it's not even like they like hold the keys to your future, but certainly like they're able to speak on your work ethic and kind of who you are and what kind of teammate you are. And I mean, that is huge.
And I say that jokingly, but as a stage manager myself, but it's the epitome of the lesson of like, how you show up in space is going to determine your future, right? So if you are kind and generous
Absolutely.
and thoughtful and you have a strong work ethic and you're showing up in those ways in a rehearsal space, in a performance space, that's only going to help you in the future, right? We've heard the horror stories of the other side of that coin. So I think it's a perfect example of like treating people with dignity and respect is the way to go in the business.
Absolutely, and in every business, right? Like just showing respect and decency, I think really
Mm-hmm.
goes a long way.
After you did Something Rotten, you continued on. Let's talk a little bit about Hamilton in Chicago and your relationship with Andy Blankenbuehler. So, first of all, my first question is like, how did you get Hamilton? And then also, what is it like sitting down with a show in another city where you do not live, right? Because your home is New York City. I know you ride your bike to the theater you're currently working at with
Yes.
MJ the Musical, right? And you have a whole community there. So what is it like working on a show out of town in Chicago? How do the logistics of that work? What is the housing situation? How do you rehearse to go into a show that is not where your home is? I would just love to know a little bit more about that to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with uh, sort of how my Hamilton journey began, because I think it's fairly fascinating. I was lucky enough to be in for an audition very early on, actually, when Hamilton was called, I think it was called the Hamilton Mixtape. And this was like the initial casting. So they were literally building the piece for the public. I remember going in and feeling like this is a big audition. This is a big deal. I had just worked with Andy, so I had a little bit of a relationship with him. I did go in and dance for him, and that went well. That went really great for me. But it was the singing audition that I knew I needed to like impress some people, because it was going to be probably new folks that hadn't seen me before or sung for. And unfortunately, I totally bombed that audition. So I walked away from that one being like, yeah, it's probably not going to be my gig. And then sort of from there, the show blew up. It was a major success. And so the next time that it came back around for me, I was a part of, I think, the second class of the Hamilton boot camp. So they realized in probably year one of Ham that they were going to need to farm like new talent to sort of meet the demands of how many productions they were hoping to mount in the next like couple years, right? They knew they wanted to do a Chicago sit down, they wanted to do a national tour, West End. They ended up doing two national tours. So there was a lot of demand for people who needed to know Hamilton. So this was while I was in Something Rotten. I was hired basically to be a part of this boot camp, which is essentially a paid audition. So they pay you to show up and rehearse, but you're still auditioning for a track in the show, and you don't really know which production you're auditioning for, where you might land. They just kind of put you through the paces and see how you do, and kind of like throw you to the deep end and see like, okay, did they sink or float? And so that went well for me. There wasn't. Oh, and actually, I think the way it went down, yeah, I just reminded myself of this. I double booked. I booked the first national tour of Hamilton and Bandstand, which were both Andy's projects. And to be perfectly honest with you, at that time in my life and career, I like desperately wanted to book a national tour because I really wanted to get out of student loan debt. It was like that was like the gig I was looking for. It was
Yeah.
like production contract, national tour, so I could live off per diem and bank my salary or put it toward my loans. Um, but at the same time, I also booked this original Broadway show that I didn't know a lot about, but it was original, and I just couldn't really pass up that opportunity. And I knew that what I was looking at was an opportunity to really solidify my relationship with Andy. He was directing and choreographing Bandstand, and so which was a big step for him. And so I thought, I think that the right move is to stay in town, stay in New York. It's not a bad. These are both great options, obviously, But stay in town and be a part of something brand new. And I'm so glad I did, because but bandstand was really, really wonderful experience. Once again, like a real family dynamic. I got to pick up the drums again because I understudied the drummer in the show, and just like really gave me so much joy, and was really in my wheelhouse as far as like material goes. So that was that experience. Unfortunately, that show did not last as long as we had hoped. I think we ran for about 6 months. And on the back end of that experience, it was really clear that bandstand was not gonna make it to the end of the year. This would have been like in probably August or so. I can't remember exactly when we got our closing notice. But what ended up happening was there was an opening in the Chicago company of Hamilton, and Andy just was like, "Okay, well, bandstand's closing. Like, you're my guy. So if you want this gig in Chicago, it's yours." I sat with that for a second, and it was truly on the heels. Like, it was like close bandstand one day, move to Chicago the next day.
Wow.
In fact, my last 2 weeks of bandstand, I was rehearsing Hamilton during the day. So this doesn't always happen in this way, but I essentially learned the show from the dance captain on Broadway. And then I closed bandstand and then moved to Chicago, and then was like, shoved into rehearsals with the Chicago company. And that was, I won't lie, it was a little awkward because they really hadn't done the work yet to universalize the show. Like, if you can imagine just like a moving freight train with like, okay, we have the OGs of Hamilton, and like they took, X amount of months to figure out what the heck they were doing. And then those people left, and then they remounted another production, and they had to distill all these like unicorns and figure out what is the version of the show that we're going to be teaching now. And so they sort of fast tracked the Chicago company. And then by the time that I joined, there were like clear discrepancies between the Broadway version of the show and the Chicago version of the show.
Oh, interesting.
I showed up in Chicago, and my timeline was like another 2 weeks before I hit the stage, because I had to relearn a lot of things. And this is also the first time I'd ever replaced on a big show. And that's a whole other skill, to be perfectly honest. There's like originating something kind of requires its own amount or own like specific skills. You're like kind of putting your stamp on it, your individuality, sort of what you do best. And then there's fitting all of that beautiful individuality and unique talent into a mold that has already been created. And you're alone by yourself in a room. So you're like, everyone's got their eyes on you, seeing how well you know the material. And there's like not really a lot of lifelines to be like learning from the other people in the space, because like you might be the only one going into the show at that time. So that was a real learning curve for me to sort of integrate myself into a already moving train, so to speak. It took some time to get used to. And then you mentioned sort of this other part, which is being new to a city. When I got there, I guess it was probably like in October, which, actually was quite lovely in Chicago. But I had to like find an apartment while I was also rehearsing all day. And luckily for me, I had some family that were living there. They were so lovely and super gracious. Basically, I was holding like complete opposite schedules of them, right? Like,
right.
They were getting up, going off to work at like really early in the morning. I was sort of had a longer morning. I would try to wake up and like go apartment hunting for that time before I had to go into the theater, probably around noon. And then I was at the theater from noon until the show ended. So we were often like 2 shifts passing in the night. I was basically sleeping on their couch. It was not super glamorous, that process, but ultimately I did find like a furnished apartment in Chicago, which was actually kind of hard to do. In New York, I feel like there's like a really clear pipeline of like artists coming and going, and there's like a flow of subletting.
Right.
Chicago, I had a harder time kind of locating that community. I'm sure it exists, but I didn't really know how to find them.
Right.
But ultimately figured it out, and spent the next 6 months in Chicago doing Hamilton. Overall, it was an awesome experience. I think the Hamilton energy or popularity was still at like a fever pitch at that time. And so specifically in Chicago, it felt like we were big fish in a smaller pond. And that was like fun to experience, to like show up to a restaurant or whatever and be like, hey, we're in the cast of Hamilton. And all of a sudden, like doors open up for you, and I hadn't really
Yeah.
experienced that yet
Yeah,
in my
no.
career. So that was really fun. I enjoyed that.
That's so cool. So you mentioned like the rehearsal process and learning the material was a learning experience and maybe more difficult based on the show. But then how do you also integrate into the cast and cast culture and company culture? Like how does that process work and how do you find the family within the company that already exists when you're coming in brand new?
Yeah. Yeah. So what was unique about working in Chicago, and I think this happens with like a lot of tours and whatnot, it's like all these people who have left their homes to go work on a show somewhere else. So everyone kind of has that in common where they're like, okay, we're all in this together. We don't live here, but we're here now. So let's figure it out. So that was kind of like one aspect. I think for me, and I think I feel comfortable saying this now, it's been some time, but you know, I think Hamilton oftentimes breeds like a lot of like younger folks who are just coming into the business. And even though I think at that time I was probably like 26, 27, which to me is still like pretty young, I actually was coming in with someone who had a lot of experience. So, and to be perfectly honest with you, I was coming into a situation where the culture wasn't great, I don't think, in Chicago. The folks were struggling, I would say, and I could just tell that like people were not gelling as well as maybe they could have, and so I think that I was brought in obviously for my talent and my ability to do the show, but also as like a sort of course correct for the culture in the building. and
Interesting.
and and you know I don't think that was totally my responsibility to change that, but I think that I think in hiring me and Andy knowing my work ethic, knowing who I am, like he felt super comfortable putting me in that position to, help like turn a new leaf for that company. And I did my best. I like certainly could tell that like things were a little off, and I like prided myself on, I think I left it better than when I had like arrived. Um, but if I'm being totally honest, like I also was ready to go when it was time to go, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like on a couple of levels, right? Like I definitely missed living in New York City. I missed like my community here. Um, but when it came time, I had negotiated a 6-month contract with Hamilton, which was actually pretty rare. They really don't do that. They really want people to stay for a year if they're going to like teach you the show and do all the work to get you
Right.
in. I fought for 6 months just because I knew that I wanted to be in New York. And so once I had finished my 6 months, they asked if I wanted to stay, and I decided to move on, which actually was a good choice. I mean, sometimes I think back on whether I cut my Hamilton journey a little too short, because like that show is still running on Broadway, and I often was like, dang, I wonder if I had stayed longer, if I could have like really solidified my relationship there. But that summer after I left Hamilton was when I auditioned for MJ. So it's kind of hard. It's hard to know like what the right move is or
Right.
was. Yeah, I certainly don't have any regrets. I still like came out of that experience with lots of friends and lots of like good people. I mean, it was good times. I think just that 6 months went by like pretty quickly, actually. Like with all said and done, it was a pretty quick experience. I will say one really special thing about doing Hamilton in Chicago was I had a lot of people from Michigan
Yeah.
finally be able to come see Hamilton, right? Like
That's
um,
very cool.
people coming out of the woodwork to see me, of course, in a show if they hadn't already, but like being in Hamilton, right? Like that
hmm
still
hmm
was pretty special, and to get to share that with people and bring them backstage was super fun and a real pleasure for me.
So then jumping off of Hamilton, then you went into MJ, but I want to pause for a second on Andy Blankenbuehler. So you've mentioned him a couple times. You've worked closely with Andy on a bunch of different projects. I'm curious, as an artist, like as a creative, how does a relationship with a singular sort of artistic partner or mentor or person influence you as a dancer, as a creative, yourself? Because just in even language, we pick up words and phrases from our friends and family members, right? And we find them in our own vocabulary. And I feel like with dance, it could be really similar. So how has Andy influenced you as a creative, as a dancer? And what has that relationship been like over the years?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and one that like even in this moment I'm continuing to sort of unpack. Uh, just a slight sidebar, like I have this new opportunity to serve as Andy's associate, so I've been finding myself sharing space with him a lot more, even recently. And there was this instance the other day where we were holding auditions for this project, and you know, we're teaching this combination that he choreographed, and we like demonstrated it for the group. And he like, jumped in. He kind of gave the 5, 6, 7, 8, like we're gonna dance together. Let's do it. And I could not help but like I just felt this like connection with our. This sounds a little woo woo, but like our bodies and our shapes and our mannerisms, the way that we interpret music and rhythm, and it's for me, I think it's um, really solidified my path, in the sense that I love this stuff. I love to do it. I have a lot of passion for storytelling and why something maybe should be doing it the way that I think it should be done or whatever. Like the proof is in the pudding, and I believe it. I believe in it. And so to have it reflected on someone who's had major success and who I really look up to is makes me believe that I'm on the right track. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, like I like feel this, and honestly, this sounds a little maybe even more cheesy, but I feel that with even Michael Jackson. Like in our show in MJ the musical, there's this whole sequence where Michael, the character, but also we know this about the real person, was highly influenced by these greats in performance. And in the musical, he highlights Fred Astaire, Bob Fosse, and the Nicholas brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, those were my heroes too, along with Michael. And I think that Andy shares that same sort of lineage. And I think that that's ultimately what I'm getting at is like and Katie, you can probably back me up on like sort of how important I think mentorship is in an artistic journey.
Yes.
And that is what I feel like I get from Andy, even though we've never really named it like mentor, mentee.
Right.
But he's given me these opportunities and given me the keys of, yes, you can do this. You are that. You like keep going. And that kind of encouragement, that those kinds of opportunities have really given me a lot of fuel to keep going and keep working in the same way that I always have. I don't know that without those experiences that I would have maybe accomplished as much as I have. I don't know that I would have had like the confidence to sort of stand on these ideas that I have.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been monumental for me. I mean, and it's like continuing to blossom where he continues to sort of open doors for me and say like, "Hey, I see you in this position. Like, what do you think?" And it oftentimes it's like, well, actually, I also saw myself in that position, but I didn't know if I was allowed to say that or allowed
Right.
to claim it. And since you are as fancy as you are, and you're telling me that I should maybe think about these things, I'm gonna go for it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been really wonderful. Yeah, I mean, it's a little spooky actually with Andy. I think when we dance together, I've seen videos of us dancing, like because he's choreographed a number of things on me, and it's uncanny, and I try to understand it. Doesn't make a lot of sense, like why we would move so similarly.
Mm-hmm.
Other people have said it. So that makes me feel like it's not just totally my experience, but
Right.
other people's experience as well. And so, even his own wife is like, yeah, you move exactly like Andy, like you're a young Andy.
Huh.
Um, and so, it's a little bizarre, but I think we both kind of feel it. So we're just kind of
Yeah.
running with it. And
Wow.
this guy Andy, like, yeah, he like still dances, he can still move, but he's also a really deep thinker. And so that's been kind of this other part of this journey with him, is like starting to think like he thinks,
Mm.
especially serving as his associate. There's often times where, I'm being asked to read his mind essentially, and
Sure.
maybe sort of come up with ideas that I think that he'll want to see, or answer questions in the way that he might want them to be done. So I feel like the mind meld is happening even more as we go along in our pathway. But having been a part of a couple of his shows, I've certainly attuned myself to his aesthetic,
Right.
and it's one that I think I respect because it's very intentional. Like
Hmm.
every move in Hamilton and
Yes.
all of his works are very intentional to the story that he's telling, whether it's like literally what the character is going through or subconsciously. Um, there's like, I always say that about Andy, there's no stone left unturned. He's got about five ideas for every moment. So when one thing's not working, he's like, okay, we move on to the next.
Hmm.
There's not really a lot of error in his creative process. Like and what I mean by that is like, he doesn't really let the ball drop. Like he's on to the next idea. He doesn't really spend a lot of time because he's probably already spent the time on his own thinking through version A, version B, version C. I think a real titan in this like commercial theater era. Like I think we're going to look back on this time in his career, and we're going to see in the way that Bob Fosse had his disciples that went on to be creatives in the business. And
Hmm.
then like Tommy Tune sort of had his people that he worked with, Susan Stroman. I would actually argue that Andy probably is from the Susan Stroman class. I like with the Sergios and the Casey Nicolau. And then I think that you're going to see the next group come from Andy's tutelage. I really believe that. I don't know if it's going to be me or not, but it's like, I know I can already tell the people who are right there. And a lot of them went through Hamilton or they went through other shows of Andy's. And I think that the commercial theater is so heavily influenced by a Hamilton because of just how monumental
Right.
that IP is. That there's like a pacing that the musical theater moves now that is sort of standard. That like there's not a lot of patience for audiences that there's like that the lyrics and the movement is all working together and moving quickly to move
Hmm.
through. There's like a cinematic quality to the way
Yeah.
that the
Yeah.
stage moves. And so that's an Andy thing. I think that Andy really pioneered that, and like the fast forwards or the rewinds and the like a character like being, maybe you're getting like the what's happening in their thoughts that's reflected in the way the ensemble is moving. Like I think people were doing that a little bit here and there, but Andy like really blew the lid off of that, and that's a part of his vocabulary now.
Yeah. No, I can totally see that, and you do see these monumental sort of moments of influence, and I totally agree with you that Andy Blankenbuehler is going to be one of those people we look back on in history and go like, "Oh, that was a moment. That
Hmm.
changed the game." His style is going to be felt in ripples throughout the rest of the industry from now until forever. And so then I'm curious, you have also done some TV and film, and now you're Andy's associate. You just worked on the Marcel Marceau project. So how does that sort of like vocabulary, watching Andy work, teach, being a part of these different companies, working with, dance captains from different spaces, how does that in turn then influence how you're moving in those spaces?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, there's like a couple of different ways I feel like I could answer that question, and they all would be like totally valid. I think that at this moment in my career, as I slowly transition out of performing into more creative opportunities, I'm still like finding my voice a little bit, right? Like, I've spent a lot of time interpreting other people's choreography and work and finding like kind of where it lives in my body. And now there have been a couple of instances where I've been given the opportunity to sort of find my own way of navigating and using movement for storytelling. You mentioned the Marcel Marceau project, which was a play called Marcel on the Train that was produced at the Classic Stage Company off Broadway, starring Ethan Slater, and he was a co-writer on the project. And you may or may not be familiar with Marcel Marceau, but he was a famous French mime. And that was a direct pull from the skills I learned working on that silent comedy troupe in Germany, right? So that's what that was. That was those skills coming back
Full circle.
to that's
Full
right.
circle.
And so I think it's worth noting because also along with that was just my training as an actor, like I and my sort of theater pedagogy training, like finding ways to distill and deliver movement vocabulary, movement instruction, movement direction in a way that many different actors and different kind of learning types can receive that information and start to synthesize it for themselves. I hope to sort of be a jack of all trades in that, like, movement direction is super fascinating to me. I mean, I've been a dancer my whole life. I love dance. I love choreography. I love like dancing to music. But I also am curious about how we tell stories with our bodies outside of dance. And I really believe that like how someone moves their body in a naturalistic scene or a realistic scene of dialogue can be just as impactful as how a dancer moves their body in a dance. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of been the next phase for me, is to sort of start to come up with my process on how to bring dance and movement to the forefront of our storytelling, even when it's not about virtuosic dance, that like even the pedestrian or quotidian type of movement can have major impacts for how the storytelling gets passed from the stage to an audience.
So let's talk about MJ the musical for a minute. So you've been with the show for about 4.5, almost 5 years now. You've been an integral part of the show. I've seen you in it. I had the pleasure of being able to see you in the show, kind of by accident, actually. You were out doing Only Gold at the time, and I happened to be in the city, and our mutual friend Matt texted me and said, "Wait, don't you have tickets for MJ tonight?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Guess what? Ryan's back in the show for like 4 shows, and you're going to see him." And so it was just a great moment. And I do have to say, like, and this is not because I'm your friend, it's because you seriously were the most interesting person to watch on the stage. And you had not been in the show for like at least a handful of weeks. Somebody, you had to come back in to replace your replacements because Correct. They were out sick. So you had not been in rehearsals. You had not been doing the show on a daily basis. You came back in for just a handful of shows. And I couldn't tell that you had been gone. And you were the most interesting person to watch on the stage.
Oh, and that's very kind.
I was like, how does he do that? So I think that just speaks to like your level of talent and dedication, as well as how much movement lives in our bodies. And I think like if you are not a mover, if you're not a dancer, you don't know what that experience is like of like having your body bring something back. So I've had the pleasure of seeing you in that show. I've also seen you perform with MJ on the Tony Awards. Like I have a screenshot of you being like, "There's Ryan" on the Tonys. So you have that credential as well. Like you've performed on the Tonys. Which is so cool. It must have been like a life-changing experience.
Oh yeah. I mean, gosh, MJ has been just such a gift in so many ways. I could like kind of rattle on like all those experiences you just mentioned. I mean, the being able to come in and out of the show for over the last like 4.5 years, they've afforded me opportunities to go do other shows, or I was able to simultaneously do a film while working on the show, and it's just been a real gift. And then, you know, I think what you're alluding to, or what you highlighting is just the sheer joy that I have in performing this show. It's a real cross section for me with sort of my love of Michael Jackson and this artist that I grew up sort of adoring. I was doing the choreography of Beat It in my living room probably by the time I was like 12 years old. And then my experience and joy of theater and Broadway, like kind of coming into one.
Mm-hmm.
And then, what's also blossomed out of this is this community of actors and creatives that have come together as a part of the cast of MJ. It is such a tight knit group, and there's so much joy. We work really hard at that
It is
show.
a hard show. It's a
Yeah,
hard show.
and everybody they bring their A game, and the folks that like maybe it's not for them, like they usually don't last very long because it just like requires a lot of commitment. But what comes out of that is sort of this collective where we all know the job we have to do and we all decide to do it with as much joy and sharing and generosity as we can. And then the other side of this too, or an additional point is, the audience. They're coming in, and I think that MJ has been a real gateway for people who maybe would not have normally come to see Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
They might choose to come see MJ the musical because they love Michael. They've felt connected to his music and his artistry, and they're like, hey, you know what? I've heard of this Broadway musical. Let me go check it out. And so I feel like it's a real responsibility to give those folks an experience that is reflective of what we do on Broadway, which is performing and delivering a consistent performance 8 times a week, and giving them the best show that we possibly can. And so that has been so cool, and to be a part of the original cast specifically, in making the culture and sort of like showing people how we do what we do. And when I mean by people, I mean like the young folks who are coming in, who this may be their first time working on Broadway. Sometimes they're like literally right out of high school or leaving college to join the cast, and setting the tone for those people, and showing them like what being a professional artist, being a professional actor on Broadway looks like, and how you go about maintaining that, which really takes some dedication and a lot of discipline.
So with all of that, Ryan, and I will say the audience piece of it, I totally agree with you. It is a great gateway to Broadway, and the energy in the audience, at least the night that I saw it, was so electric. And so I think it is like a very special experience for people who come see the show. But that being said, like it is also, I think, a piece that we've had a lot of discourse around, and I know that you and the cast and the creative team had a lot of discourse around the idea of what do we do with the artwork of people who have come under public or legal scrutiny, who maybe are being questioned, their legacy is being questioned in some way, shape, or form. It's a tough thing because Michael is such a beloved entertainment figure and opened so many doors as a part of his career for performers that came after him. But there's also a lot of discomfort with his legacy. And we see that with a lot of different artists, right? So we've been having a discourse around this idea. And also there's a lot of art that just hasn't aged well, right? And
Yeah.
is not coming from a 2020s lens, is like, oh, that doesn't sit well with me anymore. So can you talk a little bit about what the experience has been like to work on a piece like that's part of that discourse, and also sort of maybe where you and the rest of the cast sit now and the creative team sit now in terms of producing this show every single night, and where it sits as a part of this conversation?
Yeah. I would only venture as far to speak, for myself. I think that there's, for every individual, a part of MJ and any kind of like artistic endeavor, there's probably like a multitude of different like thoughts and weigh in. Um, Throughout the process of working on MJ, it became very apparent to me just how huge of a figure, especially in Black culture, Michael is and was. And so therefore, I think like many of our beloved artists and people that we admire, there's a lot of complexity, and I think that being able to hold that complexity is the responsibility of all of us, right? As human beings on this earth, as we move through spaces and we like share in experiences with each other, that any person who I'm sitting across from is not going to have the same experience as me. The best thing that I can do is share my perspective with them and listen to their perspective. And I think that what's really beautiful about what we do as theater artists is sort of hold up a mirror for people and hold space for the time to have an experience collectively, and then go about our day, go about our experiences from there on, having had that experience. So, if people come to see MJ, maybe they're on the fence about how they feel about Michael. Well, now you have an opportunity and time and a place to have that complex conversation if you so choose to do that, right? And I think that anytime that we're sort of brushing something under the rug or choosing to just cancel is a missed opportunity, right? Because nothing in this lifetime is quite as simple as all that, And I think the more that we engage with these stories, the more we realize that depending on the lens in which we're viewing it, there's many, many different interpretations. And quite honestly, there's like many different quote unquote facts, What are the facts? I think that where MJ the Musical did a really great job, specifically Lynn Nottage, the playwright, who's a major award-winning playwright. She's not afraid of dealing with some of these complexities, but in a way that is still palatable and still useful in like a commercial setting. Because let's be real, like we want to serve the MJ diehard fans just as much as we want to serve the people who are just fascinated with the historical figure that is Michael Jackson. And to be able to thread that needle is a real challenge. And I actually think that MJ the Musical does a very good job of that. We don't really hit you over the head with like all of Michael's shortcomings, but we paint a picture of a person who is really tormented by their childhood and by this desire for perfectionism. And I think that a lot of people can relate to that. I think on like a general level, no one's ever had the experience that Michael had. I can pretty much honestly say that's a singular experience, but certainly we've engaged with his music over the years. This was like a child star who was in the spotlight from when they were a very young age and then grew up in that said spotlight. And this is like an American story that we've seen kind of over and over again, where we throw so much adoration at these young people who maybe don't have quite the resources to navigate that. And so it's sort of a cautionary tale, and also one that perpetuates in our culture to this day. As you mentioned, like Michael's influence is all over pop culture and all over music. Yeah, dance, artistry. And so I think too, it would be a real disservice to sort of like just leave that alone and not sort of bring some of that complexity to light. I think it leaves enough room for folks who see the show, if they want to go down their own rabbit hole of research, like it sort of leaves the door open for that, if that's something that you'd like to do. If it's just an experience you want to have where you remember listening to Don't Stop Till You Get Enough at the barbecue in your backyard, then like there's also space for that too, right? Yeah. Like and I think that's like what is so beautiful about our show, that like there's multiple different entry points and none of them are correct or incorrect, right? I think it like kind of exists on a couple of different levels, which I think it makes it actually like really, really special.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. It's something I think about quite a lot. And I do think you're right that the show gives you enough runway to have those complex conversations, whether it's with the people you came with or simply with yourself, about the role of The role of child stars, I think in particular, the role of pop culture, how much do we let it influence us? How do ethics and morality play into the people that we elevate and the power that we give them in our society? I think it opens up a whole host of questions if you want to go down that path. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the Michael story of it all, like, oh my gosh, I mean, we could do a whole podcast episode
Oh,
just on
yes.
that,
Yes.
because
Well,
I have like a lot of thoughts, and like I've seen even in the way I was just talking to my partner about this, even in the way that Michael has re-entered the zeitgeist in a pretty big way. Like I'm hearing about a lot of young people like rediscovering his music. Obviously, the movie coming out this past spring, like he's very much present once again, and I think that because he's not going anywhere, his music isn't going anywhere, then like I think it's important actually to take the reins and try to distill some of the truth so that like as his legacy continues to move forward, we're able to really take a holistic look at like who Michael was, how he moved in space, and how some of the people around him really took advantage of him. And yeah, like I said, super complicated, but I just, him, other historical figures, I just don't know that like totally doing a hands off sort of way of dealing with them is the answer. So I say dive in and untangle it for yourself, and arrive at wherever you're going to arrive at for you. I
yeah.
think that's the best way.
So before I let you go, Ryan, I have one last question for you. And this is how we became friends, really, truly. We knew each other like a little bit before this, but we work on a project together here in Michigan, giving back to the Great Lakes Bay artistic community. So I wanted you to just talk for a moment about the Spark Artistic Mentorship Program, which you founded here in Michigan, and the importance of giving back to your home community or giving back in some way, shape, or form as an artist, and why that's so meaningful to you.
Yeah, so not that I want to correct you, but we started it. I can only take so much credit. I mentioned the mentorship piece earlier on, and it just was really apparent to me that the things that I was able to accomplish at each goalpost, or so to speak, in my career really were only happening because of sort of the belief that I had in some people in my corner. Our friend and colleague Matt Travis was someone that at a very young age took me under his wing, was providing literal transportation to and from rehearsals, giving me basically private voice lessons when I was like 15 years old. It really opened the door for me to acquire more training, for, like really expand my skills. And it wasn't lost on me that that's how that all happened for me. That's how I these doors opened, and that's how I became a better artist and was able to acquire these skills. And so I always knew that there was a pathway for me to give back to the community. I just didn't know exactly what that would look like. I did a number of teaching here and there when I would travel back home, but I really didn't have like a real structure around that. And so when theater artists were shut down during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, that seemed like the perfect timing to start maybe investing some of my time and energy in something like that. And this all coincides with the Black Lives Matter, and also my time with MJ in sort of immersing myself in cultures outside of my own. And that's when it became very apparent to me that I would like to create a scholarship program dedicated to students who are Black, Indigenous, or a person of color. And so we created the Spark Artistic Mentorship Program to do just that. And I could tell that there wasn't as many opportunities in the Great Lakes Bay region for that demographic to be seen on stage, telling their own stories, kind of leaning into their culture. And so while I knew I didn't have all the answers to make all those things right, what I wanted to do was to start somewhere. right? And start building that community with a number of other artistic leaders from the area, and use my experience as a Broadway performer to help get some attention around that stuff. And so what we have been able to do is provide some students with some great training. And then what I anticipate is that those same students will then turn around and give back to their community, and so on and so on and so on. And so, like, yes, we would love to see these students go on and have careers as performers, but really, I just hope that they become leaders in their own right and start paving the way for the next generation. And so this goes on and on and on, right? This kind of goes back to that lineage piece that we talked about earlier, that I really believe that there's that this is passed down, this love and passion for storytelling. We as human beings are predisposed to telling stories. That's how we communicate. That's how we sort of build empathy. But if we can build a pipeline where people feel encouraged to do so, to put themselves out there, I think it can be really, really empowering, and ultimately infuses our hometowns or wherever we may find ourselves with artistic leaders and culture that I think we can really be proud of. And so that's what the mission has been for me, and it's given back to me tenfold. Just to see these students really do well, improve, and feel taken care of, feel like they have a support system. And we feel it from their parents, who are letting us know that these opportunities maybe would not have come if it had not been for the Spark Artistic Mentorship Program. And so it's something I'm super duper proud of, and I really look forward to continuing to build as we move forward.
Oh, well, and it's been such a pleasure to sit on the board of that organization and work with you and our friends to build it. And I echo your sentiments, building that pipeline and creating opportunities that didn't exist before. And hopefully that comes back manyfold into our community that we love so much. It's a joy and it's a privilege to be able to do that for others.
That's right. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It is a real privilege. And I hope that maybe someone listening out there is maybe inspired to pursue it, whether they pursue a career in the arts or just like maybe give back or volunteer. I just think that all those roles play a big part, because it is really a collaborative art form. And so I'd like to just kind of leave on that note is like, get involved in any way that you can, because it really sort of adds to how colorful and diverse this like storytelling body can be.
Well, that's an amazing note for us to end on. Ryan, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule, performing 8 shows a week and doing all the other things that you're doing. It was such a pleasure to have you. I'm so glad we got to spend this time together.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to more conversations like this.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to There's No Business Like. Our producers and hosts are Brian Zelmer, Josh Benson, Kevin Maynard, Katie Miller, and me, Danielle Van Hook. Views expressed in this podcast are ours alone and are not reflective of the organizations we are a part of. Keep up with us at nobusinesslike.com. There you'll find links to all of our episodes and socials. If you like this podcast, give us a like, a follow, a review, or our favorite, a 5-star rating. Oh wait, what was that site? I got it, don't worry. It is nobusinesslike.com. Do I sound out bus-I-ness every time I type it? Yep, sure do. Stay in touch, my friends.
Here's a Leo. Hang on one second. Yeah, buddy. You can have a snack. Go ahead and get yourself something. Go ahead. Okay. He needed a snack.
Absolutely.
Oh. Hi, Gus. Oh, now Gus is in here. Gus, you have to go away. You can't be in here. He left the door open. Hang on one second.
No worries.
Gus, you can't be in here. You gotta go out. Oh. Here we go. When I record in the basement, there's 2 doors that can be closed to protect, and somehow both of them were left open. So when Leo came down, so it's like, okay, now I have to go close both doors.
Reset.
neither child nor dogs will come back downstairs.